At 62 years old, I stood in my kitchen wearing my finest silk dress, preparing dinner for 20 guests, when my daughter-in-law walked up behind me and spat directly in my face. The warm saliva dripped down my cheek as she smiled and whispered that I was nothing but a burden who should have died years ago. I said nothing. I simply wiped my face with a kitchen towel and continued stirring the sauce. But by morning, every single guest in my home would see her on her knees, begging for mercy she would never receive. My name is Victoria Chen, and this is the story of how silence became my most powerful weapon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I had spent 40 years building Chen Industries from a small textile shop into a manufacturing empire worth $47 million. My husband Richard and I had worked side by side, sacrificing vacations, weekends, and sometimes even sleep to ensure our business thrived. We employed over 300 people across 5 factories, and our products were exported to 22 countries. When Richard died suddenly of a heart attack 3 years ago, everyone expected me to sell the company and retire. Instead, I took over as CEO and increased profits by 18% in the first year alone. My son Marcus was our only child, born when I was 31 years old after years of fertility struggles. We had poured everything into raising him, sending him to the finest schools, ensuring he had every advantage we never had. He graduated from Stanford with a business degree and seemed poised to take over the family company someday. He was bright, charming, and had inherited his father's sharp mind for numbers. I thought I had raised him well. I thought he understood the value of hard work and family loyalty. Then he met Sienna Ashford at a charity gala 4 years ago. She was 28 years old, 11 years younger than Marcus, with the kind of beauty that turned heads in every room she entered. Long chestnut hair, green eyes that sparkled when she laughed, and a figure that made expensive clothes look even more expensive. She came from old money, or so she claimed. Her family supposedly owned vineyards in Napa Valley and had connections to European aristocracy. Marcus was completely enchanted within weeks of meeting her. I tried to be happy for my son. Every mother wants to see her child find love. But something about Sienna made my instincts flare with warning signals I could not ignore. The way she assessed every room she entered, cataloging expensive items with her eyes. The way she asked detailed questions about the company finances while pretending casual interest. The way she touched Marcus possessively, as if he were property she had acquired rather than a person she loved. They married after a whirlwind 6-month courtship in a wedding that cost $300,000. I paid for everything, of course, because Sienna's family wealth turned out to be mostly fictional. Her father owned a small wine shop in Sacramento, not vineyards in Napa. Her mother worked as a dental receptionist. The European aristocracy connection was a great-aunt who had married a minor Italian count 60 years ago. But by the time I discovered these lies, Marcus was already planning the wedding, and I did not want to be the mother who ruined her son's happiness. The first year of their marriage seemed peaceful enough. Sienna moved into the guest house on my property, a 3,000 square foot luxury cottage that I had built for Richard's elderly mother before she passed away. Marcus continued working at Chen Industries as vice president of operations, while Sienna claimed to be starting a lifestyle brand that never seemed to materialize beyond an Instagram account with purchase followers. I noticed small things disappearing from my main house. A jade sculpture worth $8,000 that had belonged to my grandmother. A set of pearl earrings Richard had given me for our 20th anniversary. A vintage Rolex that had been his father's. When I asked Marcus about these items, he became defensive and accused me of being paranoid. He said I was probably misplacing things due to age-related memory issues. The accusation stung, but I let it go. I did not want to create conflict over material possessions. Then my sister Helen came to visit from Seattle 6 months after Marcus and Sienna's wedding. Helen was a retired psychiatrist with 40 years of experience reading people, and she saw through Sienna immediately. We were having tea in my garden when Helen leaned close and whispered that I needed to be very careful. She said Sienna exhibited classic signs of narcissistic personality disorder, combined with sociopathic tendencies. She said the way Sienna looked at me when she thought no one was watching showed not just dislike but active hatred. I dismissed Helen's concerns as professional paranoia. Surely my own daughter-in-law did not hate me. Yes, Sienna could be cold sometimes, and yes, she made occasional cutting remarks disguised as jokes, but hatred seemed too strong a word. Helen left Seattle shaking her head, making me promise to call her if anything concerning happened. I promised, but I did not really believe I would need to. The turning point came 9 months ago when I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. The doctors caught it early during a routine mammogram, and the prognosis was excellent with treatment. I would need surgery followed by radiation therapy, but the survival rate for my specific cancer type was over 90%. I was frightened, of course, but also determined to fight. I had survived the death of my husband, the challenges of running a major company, and countless business crises. I would survive cancer too. I gathered Marcus and Sienna in my living room to tell them the news. I expected concern, maybe fear, certainly support. Marcus seemed genuinely worried, reaching over to hold my hand and asking detailed questions about treatment options. But Sienna's reaction was different. Her eyes lit up with something that looked disturbingly like excitement before she masked it with appropriate expressions of sympathy. In that moment, I finally understood what Helen had seen. My daughter-in-law was not concerned about my health. She was calculating what my death might mean for her bank account. The surgery went well, and I began radiation therapy the following month. The treatments left me exhausted and nauseous, but I continued working as much as possible from home. Chen Industries needed stable leadership, and I refused to let my illness become an excuse for declining profits. Marcus stepped up beautifully during this time, handling day-to-day operations with skill and dedication. I was proud of him and grateful for his support. But Sienna's behavior grew increasingly strange. She began visiting me more frequently, always bringing food or drinks that tasted slightly off, herbal teas that made me dizzy, soups that left me violently ill, home-baked cookies that caused severe headaches. At first, I attributed these reactions to my cancer treatment, but after the 5th incident, I secretly took samples of Sienna's cooking to a private laboratory for analysis. The results came back 2 weeks later and confirmed my worst suspicions. Sienna had been lacing my food with small doses of prescription medications that were not prescribed to me. Anxiety medications that caused confusion and disorientation. Sleep aids that left me foggy and unable to concentrate. Nothing that would kill me outright, but everything designed to make me appear mentally incompetent. The lab technician who called with the results urged me to contact the police immediately, but I told her I needed time to think. I did not go to the police. Instead, I began my own investigation. I hired a private investigator named Raymond Torres, a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate espionage and fraud cases. I told Raymond everything, showed him the lab results, and gave him unlimited access to investigate Sienna's background and activities. What he discovered over the next 6 weeks was far worse than simple poisoning. Sienna had been systematically building a case to have me declared mentally incompetent. She had befriended my primary care physician's receptionist and gained access to my medical files. She had doctored emails to make it appear that I was sending incoherent messages to business partners. She had recorded conversations with me during my worst post-treatment days when I was exhausted and confused, editing the recordings to make me sound demented. She had even convinced Marcus to start keeping a journal of my supposed cognitive decline, filling his head with lies about incidents that never happened. But the most damning evidence Raymond uncovered was a series of text messages between Sienna and a man named Derek Vaughn. Derek was Sienna's ex-boyfriend from college, and apparently they had never really broken up. The messages revealed that Sienna had targeted Marcus specifically because of his family wealth. She and Derek had planned the entire scheme from the beginning. Sienna would marry Marcus, work to have me declared incompetent, take control of the company through Marcus's inheritance, and then divorce Marcus to split the assets with Derek. The messages were explicit in their cruelty. Sienna referred to me as the old hag who was taking too long to die. She complained about having to pretend to care about my cancer treatment. She joked about how easy it was to manipulate Marcus because he was desperate for his mother's approval and would believe anything she told him. She discussed various ways to accelerate my decline, from increasing the medication doses to staging accidents that would make me appear dangerously confused. Raymond presented me with a thick folder containing all his findings. Text messages, financial records showing money transfers to Derek, photos of Sienna and Derek meeting secretly at hotels, Medical records proving the medications in my food were never prescribed to me. Testimony from the lab that analyzed my food samples, and character statements from Sienna's former friends describing her pattern of manipulation and fraud. I sat in my study for hours after Raymond left, staring at the evidence of my daughter-in-law's betrayal. Part of me wanted to go immediately to Marcus and show him everything. But I knew Sienna well enough by now to understand that a direct confrontation would only make her more dangerous. She would lie, manipulate, and turn Marcus against me. She would claim the evidence was fabricated, that I was paranoid and delusional because of my cancer treatment. She would cry and play the victim so convincingly that Marcus might actually believe her. No, I needed a different approach. I needed to let Sienna think she was winning. I needed to give her enough rope to hang herself in front of witnesses who could not be manipulated or dismissed.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
And I needed to do it in a way that would force Marcus to see the truth with his own eyes, leaving no room for denial or rationalization. That is when I began planning the dinner party that would change everything. I told Marcus and Sienna that I wanted to host a gathering to celebrate the end of my radiation treatment. I said I wanted to thank the people who had supported me through my cancer journey and reconnect with friends I had neglected during my illness. I asked Sienna to help me plan the event, knowing she would see it as an opportunity to demonstrate my supposed incompetence in front of important witnesses. The guest list included 20 people. Marcus and Sienna, of course. My sister Helen flying in from Seattle. My best friend Margaret, who had known me for 35 years. Robert Kim, my company's chief financial officer. Patricia Delgado, my longtime attorney. Dr. James Morrison, my oncologist. Detective Sarah Walsh from the local police department's fraud division. Judge Theodore Harrison, who had served on several charity boards with Richard and me. And a dozen other business associates, family friends, and company executives who had known me for decades. I scheduled the dinner for a Saturday evening, exactly 3 weeks after receiving Raymond's investigation report. I told everyone the party would begin at 7 in the evening with cocktails, followed by dinner at 8. I asked guests to arrive promptly because I had something important to share with everyone. The mysterious nature of my invitation created exactly the curiosity and anticipation I wanted. During those 3 weeks, I continued to pretend nothing had changed. I accepted Sienna's food and drinks, but I secretly disposed of everything she gave me and ate only food I prepared myself or ordered from restaurants. I pretended to be increasingly confused and forgetful, playing the role of a declining old woman so convincingly that Sienna grew more confident and careless. I overheard her on the phone with Derek, laughing about how the old bat was finally losing her grip on reality. I also made some quiet arrangements. I transferred the majority of my personal assets into an irrevocable trust controlled by Patricia Delgado, my attorney. I updated my will to specifically disinherit anyone who attempted to have me declared incompetent or who participated in schemes to defraud me. I gave Raymond Torres permission to share his investigation findings with Detective Walsh, providing her with enough evidence to open a formal criminal investigation. And I installed hidden security cameras throughout my home, particularly in the kitchen where Sienna had been preparing her poisoned meals. The day of the dinner party arrived with perfect spring weather. I spent the morning cooking, preparing my grandmother's famous recipes that had been family favorites for generations. Sienna came over around noon, ostensibly to help with preparations. She was in an excellent mood, chattering about how wonderful it was that I was feeling well enough to host such a large gathering. She said she was so proud of how I had handled my cancer treatment, and that she hoped this dinner would be a beautiful celebration of my recovery. I smiled and thanked her, playing the role of the grateful mother-in-law who appreciated her daughter-in-law's support. I asked her to prepare her special herbal tea, the one she had been bringing me throughout my treatment. She seemed delighted by the request, immediately setting about brewing a pot with the same herbs and medications she had been using to poison me for months. I watched her add the crushed pills when she thought I was not looking, grinding them into powder and stirring them into the tea with practiced efficiency. When the tea was ready, Sienna poured 2 cups, one for each of us. She handed me mine with a sweet smile and raised her own cup in a toast. "To your health, Victoria," she said warmly. "May you have many more years of happiness and prosperity." I clinked my cup against hers and brought it to my lips, pretending to take a long sip. But I had learned some tricks during my weeks of investigation. I had practiced the art of appearing to drink while actually keeping the liquid in my mouth and later spitting it into a napkin. It was a skill that required careful timing and misdirection, but I had perfected it. As the afternoon progressed, I continued my performance of gradual decline. I forgot where I had put serving platters I had used just moments before. I asked Sienna the same questions multiple times. I confused the names of dishes I had been making for 40 years. I stumbled slightly when walking and caught myself on the counter with exaggerated clumsiness. Sienna watched all of this with barely concealed satisfaction, and I could see her mentally rehearsing the stories she would tell guests about my deteriorating condition. Around 5 in the evening, Marcus arrived to help set up tables and chairs in the garden where we would be dining. The weather was perfect for an outdoor dinner, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of jasmine from the bushes Richard had planted 20 years ago. Marcus seemed happy and relaxed, excited about the evening ahead. He had no idea that his entire world was about to collapse. By 6:30, I had completed all the dinner preparations. The garden was beautiful, with string lights creating a warm glow above the tables. Fresh flowers decorated every surface. Wine glasses sparkled in the fading sunlight. The food was arranged buffet-style on long tables, dishes that represented my heritage and my family's history. Everything was perfect, exactly as I had planned. Guests began arriving at 7, and I greeted each one warmly, playing the role of the slightly confused but charming hostess. I mixed up a few names deliberately. I told the same story twice to different people. I nearly dropped a tray of appetizers but caught it just in time. I noticed Sienna hovering nearby during these interactions, making sure everyone witnessed my supposed cognitive decline. She even made a few concerned comments to guests, stage whispering that she was worried about my mental state but trying to be supportive. By 7:30, all 20 guests had arrived, and cocktail hour was in full swing. People mingled in the garden, drinking wine and enjoying appetizers. The conversation was pleasant and light, exactly what you would expect at a dinner party celebrating someone's recovery from cancer. No one had any idea what was coming. At exactly 8 o'clock, I asked everyone to take their seats at the dining tables. I stood at the head of the main table with a wine glass in my hand, preparing to make a toast. Marcus sat to my right, beaming with pride at his mother who had survived cancer and was hosting such a lovely evening. Sienna sat to my left, her face a perfect mask of loving concern mixed with subtle superiority. The other guests arranged themselves around the remaining seats, their faces turned toward me expectantly. I began my speech with traditional words of gratitude. I thanked everyone for coming. I thanked them for their support during my illness. I talked about how cancer had given me a new perspective on life and made me reevaluate what truly mattered. I saw Sienna nodding along, probably thinking this was going to be a sentimental speech about family and forgiveness and moving forward together. Then I changed direction. I said that cancer had not only given me perspective on life, but also clarity about the people around me. I said that facing mortality had helped me see through facades and recognize who genuinely cared about me, versus who was simply waiting for me to die. I saw Sienna's smile falter slightly, the first crack in her perfect mask. I continued, saying that over the past 9 months, I had been the victim of a systematic campaign to destroy my mental competence and steal my company. I said someone close to me had been poisoning my food with prescription medications, doctoring evidence to make me appear demented, and planning to have me declared legally incompetent so they could seize control of my assets. The garden became absolutely silent. Every eye was fixed on me, and I could see the confusion and shock spreading across faces. Then I turned to face Sienna directly and said her name. I said that my daughter-in-law had been poisoning me for 9 months as part of an elaborate scheme to steal my company and divorce my son. I said she had been working with her ex-boyfriend Derek Vaughn to defraud my family of everything we had built over 4 decades. I said the herbal tea she had prepared for me that very afternoon contained crushed anxiety medication and sleep aids that were never prescribed to me. Sienna's face went through a remarkable transformation. First shock, then fear, then desperate calculation as she searched for a way to explain or deny what I was saying. She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up my hand to stop her. I was not finished yet. I told the assembled guests that I had hired a private investigator who had documented everything. I said Detective Walsh was already familiar with the case and had enough evidence to press criminal charges. I said my attorney Patricia Delgado had helped me protect my assets from Sienna's scheme. I said Judge Harrison would be interested to know that Sienna had attempted to bribe a court clerk to expedite guardianship proceedings. Marcus sat frozen beside me, his face pale with shock. He looked at Sienna, then at me, then back at Sienna, clearly struggling to process what he was hearing. Sienna finally found her voice and began protesting loudly. She said I was delusional from my cancer treatment. She said this was exactly the kind of paranoid behavior she had been documenting for months. She turned to Marcus and begged him to see that his mother needed help, that her mind was failing, that she was making up conspiracy theories. But I had prepared for this exact response. I pulled out my phone and connected it to a portable speaker I had hidden under my chair. Then I played the audio recordings Raymond had obtained of Sienna's phone conversations with Derek Vaughn. Her voice filled the garden, crystal clear and unmistakable, discussing how the old hag was taking too long to die, laughing about manipulating Marcus, planning how to split my assets after forcing me into a care facility, joking about increasing medication doses to speed up my mental decline. The color drained from Sienna's face as her own words condemned her in front of 20 witnesses. Several guests gasped audibly. Margaret, my best friend, covered her mouth with her hand in shock. Robert Kim, my CFO, looked like he might be sick. Marcus stared at Sienna with an expression of such profound betrayal that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I played 3 different recordings, each more damning than the last. In one, Sienna discussed staging an accident that would make me appear dangerously confused and unable to care for myself. In another, she laughed about how easy it was to forge my signature on documents. In the third, she and Derek celebrated prematurely about the millions they would steal once I was declared incompetent. When the recordings finished, the silence in the garden was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. Every eye was on Sienna, who sat paralyzed in her chair, her perfect mask completely shattered. Then Detective Walsh stood up from her seat at the far end of the table and identified herself. She said she had obtained warrants that afternoon based on evidence provided by Raymond Torres. She said Sienna was under arrest for attempted fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and assault with intent to cause bodily harm through poisoning. That is when Sienna finally broke. She lurched up from her chair and dropped to her knees in front of me, grabbing at my dress with both hands. She began sobbing and begging, saying it was all Derek's idea, that he had manipulated her, that she never really wanted to hurt me. She said she loved Marcus and just wanted to be part of the family. She said if I pressed charges she would go to prison, and did I really want to destroy her life over a misunderstanding? I looked down at this woman who had spent 9 months systematically poisoning me, while pretending to care about my health. This woman who had manipulated my son and stolen from my home. This woman who had referred to me as an old hag who needed to hurry up and die. And I felt nothing but cold satisfaction as I spoke my next words. I told Sienna that she had made her choices and now she would face the consequences. I said that every action she had taken was documented and witnessed. I said that the law would determine her punishment, not me. I said that she was no longer welcome in my home, on my property, or anywhere near my family. Then I turned to Detective Walsh and said I was ready to file formal charges, and would cooperate fully with the investigation and prosecution. Detective Walsh moved forward with handcuffs, and Sienna's begging turned to screaming. She cried that this was not fair, that I had set her up, that I was a vindictive old woman who could not accept that Marcus had moved on with his life. She turned to Marcus, still on her knees, reaching for him desperately. She begged him to help her, to tell everyone that I was lying, to stop the detective from arresting her. Marcus sat motionless, staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. The pain in his eyes was terrible to witness, but I knew it was necessary. My son needed to understand exactly who he had married, and what she had been planning to do to his family. After what felt like an eternity, Marcus finally spoke. He said that Sienna should go with Detective Walsh. He said he needed time to process everything. He said he could not look at her right now. Sienna's face transformed from desperate pleading to pure hatred in an instant. She spat at me one final time, literally, the saliva landing on my silk dress just as it had in my kitchen earlier that day. But this time, I did not wipe it away silently. This time, I had 20 witnesses who saw exactly what kind of person she really was. Detective Walsh pulled Sienna to her feet and led her away from the garden toward a police car waiting in my driveway. Her screams and protests faded as she was placed in the back seat and driven away. The dinner party dissolved into chaos after Detective Walsh drove away with Sienna in handcuffs. My carefully prepared meal sat untouched on the buffet tables while guests clustered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones about what they had just witnessed. Some looked at me with newfound respect, others with something close to fear, as if they were recalculating everything they thought they knew about Victoria Chen. Margaret approached me first, pulling me into a tight embrace that lasted several seconds before she stepped back to examine my face with the concern of a friend who had known me since we were both young mothers struggling to balance family and career. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly, though we both knew the question was inadequate for the situation. I nodded and told her I was fine, that I had been preparing for this confrontation for weeks and knew exactly what would happen. But even as I said the words, I felt the adrenaline that had sustained me through the evening beginning to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with my cancer treatment and everything to do with the emotional toll of exposing such profound betrayal. Marcus remained seated at the dining table, his hands gripping the edge so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. He stared at the empty chair where his wife had been sitting moments before, and I could see him replaying every conversation, every moment of his marriage, searching for signs he had missed. Dr. Morrison, my oncologist, approached him cautiously and placed a hand on his shoulder, speaking in the calm tones he probably used with patients receiving devastating diagnoses. Marcus did not respond, did not even acknowledge the doctor's presence, simply continued staring at that empty chair as if it held answers to questions he was only beginning to understand how to ask. Helen, my sister, took charge of managing the remaining guests with the efficiency of someone accustomed to handling crises. She thanked everyone for coming and suggested they head home, explaining that the family needed privacy to process what had happened. Most guests left quickly, offering brief expressions of support before hurrying to their cars, probably eager to escape the uncomfortable intensity of the situation. But a few lingered. Patricia Delgado, my attorney, stayed behind to discuss legal next steps. Robert Kim, my CFO, wanted to know if this would affect company operations. Judge Harrison pulled me aside to say that if I needed anything, any assistance with legal proceedings or protection orders, I should not hesitate to call him. By 9:30, only family and a handful of close associates remained in my garden. The string lights still glowed cheerfully above the untouched food, creating a surreal contrast with the devastation that hung in the air like smoke. I asked my housekeeper Maria to begin clearing the tables and storing the food, knowing that none of us would have any appetite that evening. She moved quietly through the space, her face carefully neutral, though I knew she had heard everything from her position near the kitchen door where staff typically waited during formal dinners. Marcus finally moved, standing abruptly and walking away from the table without a word to anyone. He headed toward the guest house where he and Sienna had been living, and I felt a stab of concern about what he might do once he was alone with his thoughts and the physical reminders of his shattered marriage. Helen must have had the same concern because she immediately followed him, catching up just as he reached the door. I could not hear their conversation from where I stood, but I saw Helen place both hands on Marcus's shoulders and speak earnestly into his face. After a moment, he nodded and allowed her to lead him back toward the main house. Patricia approached me with her ever-present leather portfolio, already making notes about the legal proceedings that would follow. She said Detective Walsh would need my formal statement within 48 hours, and that the district attorney's office would likely want to schedule a meeting early the following week. The charges against Sienna were serious enough that bail might be denied entirely, especially given the evidence of ongoing poisoning and the flight risk posed by her relationship with Derek Vaughn. Patricia said we should also discuss filing a civil lawsuit to recover any assets Sienna had stolen or damaged, though she suspected most of the stolen items had probably been sold or given to Derek. Robert Kim waited until Patricia finished before approaching with his own concerns. He said that news of Sienna's arrest would likely reach the business community quickly, and we needed to prepare a statement for Chen Industries employees and shareholders. The last thing we needed was rumors suggesting instability in company leadership or questions about my mental competence. I agreed and asked him to draft something simple and factual for my review. We would emphasize that this was a personal family matter being handled through appropriate legal channels, and had no bearing on company operations or my capacity as CEO. By 10 o'clock, Patricia and Robert had both departed, leaving only family in my home. Helen had convinced Marcus to sit in the living room, and I found them there together, my sister speaking in low tones while my son stared blankly at the fireplace where family photos lined the mantel. Photos of Marcus as a baby, as a boy at his first day of school, as a young man at his college graduation, and yes, photos from his wedding day with Sienna smiling radiantly in her white dress while Marcus gazed at her with obvious adoration. Looking at those wedding photos now felt like examining evidence of a crime, proof of how thoroughly Sienna had deceived all of us. I sat down across from Marcus, waiting for him to acknowledge my presence. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were red-rimmed, though I had not seen him actually cry. He asked if I had known for certain that Sienna was guilty, or if there had been any doubt in my mind. The question surprised me with its directness, cutting through shock and pain to the core issue that would probably haunt him for years. Had his mother destroyed his marriage based on suspicion, or had she possessed absolute proof? I told him the truth, that I had hired Raymond Torres after the 5th time Sienna's food made me violently ill, and that I had not acted on my suspicions until I had laboratory proof of poisoning plus documented evidence of her conspiracy with Derek Vaughn. I said the recordings he had heard that evening were just a small sample of the evidence Raymond had collected over 6 weeks of investigation. I offered to show Marcus everything: the text messages, the financial records, the photos of Sienna meeting secretly with Derek, the medical analysis of the poison food. I said he deserved to see the full scope of what had been planned against our family. Marcus was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Then he asked why I had not come to him immediately when I first suspected something was wrong. Why had I continued to allow Sienna access to our home and our lives for weeks after discovering her betrayal? The question carried an edge of accusation, as if he was beginning to search for ways to be angry with me instead of confronting the full horror of his wife's actions. I explained that I had considered telling him right away but realized Sienna would simply deny everything and turn the accusation back on me. She would say I was paranoid from cancer treatment, that I was jealous of his marriage, that I could not accept him having a life separate from me. She would cry and play the victim so convincingly that he might believe her over his own mother. I said I needed irrefutable proof presented in a way that left no room for manipulation or denial, which was why I had staged the dinner party with witnesses who could not be dismissed as biased or delusional. Helen interjected softly, reminding Marcus that Sienna had been poisoning me for 9 months, systematically working to destroy my mental competence, so she could steal everything our family had built. She said his mother had been protecting not just herself but Marcus as well, because once Sienna gained control of the company through guardianship proceedings, her plan had been to divorce him and split the assets with Derek. Marcus would have been left with nothing: his inheritance stolen, his marriage revealed as a calculated fraud, his mother locked away in a care facility. The weight of this realization seemed to break something in Marcus. He doubled over as if physically struck, his hands covering his face while harsh sobs shook his shoulders. Helen moved to sit beside him, wrapping an arm around his back in the same gesture she had used when he was a child who had fallen and scraped his knee. But this was not a scraped knee that would heal with a bandage and kiss. This was a wound that would leave scars, a betrayal that would shape how he viewed relationships and trust for the rest of his life. I wanted to go to my son, to comfort him the way mothers do, but something held me back. Perhaps it was the knowledge that my comfort right now would feel like victory, as if I was pleased to have been proven right about Sienna. Perhaps it was respect for the grief he needed to experience without his mother hovering over him. Or perhaps it was simply exhaustion, the culmination of 9 months spent fighting cancer and fighting my daughter-in-law's plot simultaneously, both diseases eating away at different parts of my life. Around midnight, Helen convinced Marcus to stay in one of the guest rooms in the main house rather than returning to the cottage where every object would remind him of Sienna. He agreed with the blank compliance of someone too emotionally depleted to make decisions. Helen helped him upstairs while I remained in the living room, staring at those wedding photos and wondering when exactly Sienna had decided to target my family. Had it been before she even met Marcus, a calculated search for a wealthy man she could manipulate? Or had the plan formed gradually after she realized how much money was at stake? I eventually made my way to my own bedroom but found sleep impossible despite my exhaustion. My mind kept replaying the evening, from the moment I had announced Sienna's crimes to the instant Detective Walsh had led her away in handcuffs. I thought about the expression on Sienna's face when she realized her scheme had been discovered, the way her mask of concern had crumbled to reveal the calculating predator underneath. I thought about her final act of spitting on me, her true nature finally visible to everyone who had witnessed it. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. I recognized Marcus's distinctive gait, the way he walked heavily on his heels just like his father had. The footsteps paused outside my door for several seconds, and I wondered if he was considering knocking, wanting to talk more about what had happened. But after a moment, the footsteps continued down the hallway, and I heard the soft click of the guest room door closing. Sleep finally came near dawn, restless and filled with fragmented dreams about Richard. In the dreams, he was standing beside me during the dinner party, his hand on my shoulder as I confronted Sienna. He was proud of me, I could feel it, proud that I had protected our son and our company even though it meant exposing such painful truths. When I woke to sunlight streaming through my bedroom windows, I felt his absence more acutely than I had in months, wishing he were there to help Marcus through the devastating aftermath of his destroyed marriage. The house was quiet when I went downstairs around 8. Maria had already arrived and was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, though she worked more quietly than usual, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace. I thanked her for handling the cleanup from the previous evening and asked her to prepare something simple for breakfast, perhaps scrambled eggs and toast. She nodded and immediately set to work while I made coffee, grateful for the familiar routine of morning tasks that required no emotional processing. Helen appeared around 8:30, already dressed and looking more rested than she had any right to be given the stress of the previous evening. She had always possessed this ability to compartmentalize crisis and maintain her equilibrium, probably a skill developed during decades of psychiatric practice dealing with patients in acute distress. She poured herself coffee and sat at the kitchen island beside me, and for several minutes we simply shared silence, sisters who had known each other long enough that words were not always necessary. Marcus came downstairs shortly after 9, looking like he had not slept at all. His clothes were wrinkled from sleeping in them, his hair uncombed, his face bearing the haunted expression of someone who had spent hours confronting truths he wished he could unknow. Maria offered him breakfast, but he declined, accepting only coffee that he held without drinking, staring into the dark liquid as if it might contain answers. I asked Marcus if he had slept, knowing the answer but needing to break the silence somehow. He shook his head and said he had spent most of the night going through text messages and emails from Sienna, looking for signs of her betrayal that he had missed. He said every affectionate message now read like manipulation, every expression of concern felt like part of her calculated performance. He said he could not identify a single genuine moment in their entire relationship, could not point to one interaction that had not been part of her scheme. Helen asked if Marcus had contacted Sienna's family to inform them of the arrest. He said he had not and did not plan to, that Sienna's parents would find out soon enough through official channels. I sensed anger beneath his exhaustion, a growing fury at having been used so completely. I told him that anger was appropriate and healthy, that he should not try to suppress or minimize what he was feeling. Sienna had betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible, and he had every right to be enraged. Patricia Delgado called my phone around 10, asking if I was available to come to the police station that afternoon to provide my formal statement to Detective Walsh. I agreed and said I could be there by 2 o'clock. Patricia said she would meet me there, and that we should also discuss next steps for the civil case against Sienna. I asked if there had been any developments overnight, and Patricia said that Sienna had been formally arraigned that morning and bail had been set at $500,000. Given that Sienna had no assets and no family wealthy enough to post such a bond, she would likely remain in custody until trial. The news that Sienna was still in jail brought me a satisfaction I did not entirely like in myself but could not deny. After 9 months of living with the threat of her presence, of accepting her poisoned food and listening to her fake expressions of concern, knowing she was locked away in a cell felt like finally being able to breathe freely. I told Patricia I would see her at 2 and ended the call. Marcus asked what the attorney had said, and I shared the information about bail and Sienna's continued detention. He nodded slowly and said that was good, that he did not think he could handle seeing her right now. Then he asked a question that caught me off guard. He asked if I thought Sienna had ever actually loved him, even a little bit, or if every moment of their relationship had been pure calculation. I considered lying, offering him the comfort of ambiguity, but I had built the previous evening's confrontation on truth and could not start offering false comfort now. I told him that based on the evidence Raymond Torres had collected, Sienna had targeted him specifically because of his family wealth and had maintained contact with Derek Vaughn throughout their relationship. I said the text messages between Sienna and Derek suggested their affair had never ended, that she had been planning to divorce Marcus from the moment she married him. I said I was sorry, but I did not believe Sienna had ever truly loved him. The answer seemed to physically pain Marcus, his face contorting as he absorbed this final confirmation. But he nodded and thanked me for my honesty, saying he had needed to hear the truth even though it hurt. Helen reached over and squeezed his hand, and I felt grateful for my sister's presence, for her ability to provide comfort that Marcus might not be able to accept from me right now. The rest of the morning passed in a strange limbo, all of us occupying the same space but absorbed in our own thoughts. Helen made phone calls to cancel my upcoming appointments and inform close friends about what had happened, handling the social fallout with her characteristic efficiency. Marcus sat in the living room with his laptop, presumably dealing with his own logistical nightmare of separating his life from Sienna's. And I spent time in my study reviewing documents Patricia would need for the afternoon meeting, preparing myself for the detailed statement Detective Walsh would require. Around noon, Raymond Torres called to check on me and asked if there was anything else I needed from his investigation. I thanked him for his excellent work and said his evidence had been crucial to exposing Sienna's scheme. He said he was available if I needed additional surveillance or research as the case progressed, and I told him I would keep that in mind. Before hanging up, Raymond mentioned that he had learned Derek Vaughn had been arrested that morning trying to board a flight to Mexico. Apparently, someone had tipped off the police about his involvement in Sienna's conspiracy. The news about Derek's arrest added another layer of satisfaction to an already vindicating day. Sienna's co-conspirator would not escape justice after all. I shared this information with Marcus, and I saw something shift in his expression, a hardening that suggested his grief was beginning to transform into determination. He said he wanted to attend my meeting with Detective Walsh that afternoon, that he wanted to see all the evidence and understand the full scope of what Sienna had planned. I asked if he was certain he was ready to see everything, knowing that some of the text messages between Sienna and Derek were cruel in their mockery of Marcus. He said he needed to see it all, that partial knowledge would be worse than complete understanding. I respected his decision and called Patricia to let her know Marcus would be joining us at the police station. We left for the meeting around 1:30, driving in silence through familiar streets that looked different somehow, as if the revelation of Sienna's betrayal had altered the landscape itself. When we arrived at the police station, Patricia was already waiting in the lobby, her professional demeanor a steadying presence amid the emotional chaos of the past 18 hours. She greeted Marcus warmly and asked how he was holding up, and he managed a weak smile while saying he was taking things 1 hour at a time. Detective Walsh met us in a conference room equipped with recording equipment and evidence boxes. She was in her mid-40s, with short gray hair and the weary expression of someone who had seen too many family betrayals in her career. She thanked me for coming and explained that my statement would be recorded and would likely be used in the criminal trial against Sienna. She said I should take my time and include as much detail as possible about Sienna's actions and the impact they had on my health and well-being. I spent the next 2 hours providing my statement, walking Detective Walsh through everything from my initial suspicions to the laboratory analysis of poison food to the decision to stage the dinner party confrontation. I described each instance of Sienna bringing me food that made me ill, explained how I had secretly disposed of her offerings while pretending to consume them, and detailed the symptoms I had experienced before I realized I was being poisoned. I described finding missing items from my home and Sienna's increasing pressure for me to sign over financial control. Marcus sat beside me during the entire statement, his face growing paler as I recounted the systematic nature of his wife's betrayal. When I described the text messages where Sienna had called me an old hag who needed to hurry up and die, I saw him flinch as if physically struck. When I explained how she had been planning to divorce him and split my assets with Derek, his hands clenched into fists on the table. But he remained silent and listened to everything, just as he had said he needed to do. Detective Walsh then showed us additional evidence that had been collected during Sienna's arrest. A search of the guest house where Marcus and Sienna lived had uncovered several prescription bottles of medications that matched the substances found in my food. The prescriptions were in fake names, filled at pharmacies in neighboring counties where Sienna was not known. Police had also found detailed notes in Sienna's handwriting outlining her plan to have me declared incompetent, including names of doctors she planned to bribe and judges she believed could be influenced. But the most damning evidence was Sienna's laptop, which contained months of correspondence with Derek Vaughn. The emails laid out their scheme in explicit detail, from the initial plan to have Sienna seduce a wealthy man to the specific timeline for stealing assets and disappearing together. There were spreadsheets calculating the value of my estate and projecting how much they could extract before being discovered. There were discussions of which countries had no extradition treaties with the United States, where they could live comfortably on stolen money without fear of prosecution. Marcus asked to see the emails, and Detective Walsh pulled up several examples on her computer screen. I watched my son read his wife's words describing him as an easy mark who was so desperate for approval that he would believe anything she told him. I watched him see the messages where Sienna joked with Derek about having to pretend physical attraction to Marcus when all she really wanted was his money. I watched him confront the reality that his marriage had been a business transaction from the very first day. When Marcus finally looked away from the screen, his face had transformed from grief to cold fury. He asked Detective Walsh what the maximum possible sentence was for Sienna's crimes. She said that given the charges of attempted fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse and assault through poisoning, Sienna could face up to 25 years in prison if convicted on all counts. Marcus nodded and said he would do everything in his power to ensure she served every day of that sentence. Patricia spoke up then, reminding us that the criminal case was just one part of the justice we would pursue. She said we should also file a civil lawsuit to recover the value of items Sienna had stolen from my home, and to claim damages for the emotional distress and health impacts of being poisoned for 9 months. She said we could probably also pursue criminal charges against Derek Vaughn for his role in the conspiracy, which would prevent him from profiting from Sienna's crimes, even if she somehow managed to avoid conviction. We spent another hour at the police station reviewing evidence and discussing the timeline for prosecution. Detective Walsh said the district attorney was treating this as a priority case given the seriousness of the crimes and the quality of the evidence. A grand jury would likely be convened within 2 weeks to formally indict Sienna, and the trial could begin as early as 3 months from now. She said I should prepare to testify in detail about the poisoning and its effects, and that my medical records would be subpoenaed to demonstrate the correlation between consuming Sienna's food and experiencing adverse symptoms. By the time we left the police station, it was nearly 5 in the evening, and I felt completely drained despite having spent most of the day sitting and talking. Marcus drove us home in silence, and I could see him processing everything he had learned. When we pulled into my driveway, he turned off the car but made no move to get out. Instead, he turned to face me and said something I had not expected. He apologized. He said he was sorry for not seeing through Sienna's manipulation sooner, for giving her access to our family and our lives, for doubting my concerns when I had tried to warn him that something felt wrong about her. He said he had been so eager to believe he had found love that he had ignored every red flag and dismissed every warning sign. He said his foolishness had nearly cost me my life and had definitely cost me months of suffering while being systematically poisoned. I told Marcus that he had nothing to apologize for, that Sienna was a skilled manipulator who had fooled many people, not just him. I said she had studied human psychology and specifically targeted his vulnerabilities, his desire for a family of his own, and his need to prove he could build something separate from his parents' shadow. I said that recognizing manipulation while you are caught in it is nearly impossible, which is exactly what makes people like Sienna so dangerous. But Marcus shook his head and insisted that he should have trusted my instincts about her. He said I had built a successful company by reading people accurately, and he had dismissed my concerns as maternal jealousy or difficulty accepting his marriage. He said that if he had listened to me from the beginning, none of this would have happened. The self-recrimination in his voice was painful to hear, And I knew he would carry guilt about this for years regardless of what I said. Helen was waiting for us when we entered the house, and she had prepared a simple dinner of soup and bread that none of us particularly wanted but all of us needed. We sat together at the kitchen table, picking at our food while discussing practical matters like when Marcus would need to move his belongings out of the guest house, and whether we should change the security codes on all the doors. These mundane logistical questions felt easier to handle than the larger emotional devastation, so we focused on them with an intensity that was probably disproportionate to their actual importance. That evening, as darkness fell over my property and the string lights in the garden came on automatically, I stood at my bedroom window looking out at the space where the dinner party had taken place just 24 hours earlier. The tables were gone now, put away in storage, and the garden looked peaceful and ordinary, giving no hint of the dramatic confrontation that had unfolded there. I thought about Sienna spending her first night in jail, facing the consequences of her actions. I thought about Marcus processing the destruction of his marriage, and the revelation that he had been nothing but a mark to the woman he loved. And I thought about myself, about how close I had come to losing everything because I had tried to be welcoming to my daughter-in-law despite my reservations. The cancer had taught me that life was fragile, and could be stolen by diseases that attacked from within. But Sienna had taught me something else entirely, that sometimes the greatest threats come from the people we invite into our homes and our hearts. As I finally climbed into bed that night, exhausted beyond measure, I felt grateful for my survival and determined to use the remaining years of my life to protect not just myself but others who might face similar betrayals. Justice had been served, but the work of healing and rebuilding was only beginning. 3 months passed before Sienna's trial began, 3 months during which my life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The cancer remained in remission, my strength gradually returning as the effects of her poisoning finally left my system. Marcus moved back into the main house temporarily, unable to face the guest cottage that held too many memories of his fraudulent marriage. He threw himself into work at Chen Industries with an intensity that worried me, but Helen assured me it was his way of processing grief and rebuilding his sense of self-worth. The trial lasted 2 weeks, a parade of witnesses and evidence that painted Sienna as exactly what she was, a calculating predator who had targeted my family with precision and malice. Derek Vaughn testified against her in exchange for a reduced sentence, describing in clinical detail how they had planned the entire scheme over a year before Sienna even met Marcus. He explained how they had researched wealthy families in the area, identified me as a target because of my age and recent widowhood, and orchestrated their meeting at the charity gala to seem like chance rather than calculation. The most powerful testimony came from the toxicologist who had analyzed the food samples I had provided. She explained how Sienna had carefully calibrated the doses of medication to cause confusion and disorientation without triggering obvious overdose symptoms. The poisoning was designed to mimic early dementia, creating a medical justification for the incompetency proceedings Sienna planned to initiate. It was sophisticated, methodical, and utterly ruthless. When I took the stand, I spoke directly to the jury about the 9 months I had spent doubting my own mind, wondering if I was truly losing my mental capacity as Sienna claimed. I described the terror of feeling my thoughts become foggy after drinking her tea, the humiliation of forgetting simple things I had known my entire life, the isolation as I withdrew from friends and colleagues because I feared they would notice my decline. I told them about the morning I realized my own daughter-in-law was systematically destroying me, and the cold calculation required to pretend ignorance while gathering evidence of her crimes. Marcus testified as well, his voice steady despite the pain evident in his eyes. He described how Sienna had manipulated him into documenting my supposed cognitive decline, how she had coached him to notice signs of dementia that did not actually exist, how she had slowly isolated him from questioning her narrative. He admitted his own complicity through willful blindness, acknowledging that part of him had known something was wrong but had chosen his wife over his mother until the evidence became impossible to ignore. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sienna showed no emotion when the verdict was read, her face a blank mask that revealed nothing of whatever thoughts churned beneath. But when the judge sentenced her to 22 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years, I saw her composure crack just slightly, a flash of genuine fear crossing her features before she regained control. Derek Vaughn received 8 years for his role in the conspiracy, A sentence that felt inadequate but was the price of his cooperation. As he was led away in handcuffs, he glanced at Sienna one final time, and I saw something pass between them that might have been regret or might have been nothing more than recognition that their plan had failed completely. The civil lawsuit took another 2 months to resolve, but ultimately I recovered nearly everything Sienna had stolen plus additional damages for emotional distress and medical expenses related to the poisoning. The jade sculpture, the pearl earrings, the vintage Rolex, all were located and returned. Some items had been sold, but the proceeds were traced and recovered. It would not erase what had happened, but it restored what had been taken. Marcus began dating again 6 months after the trial, tentatively at first, clearly terrified of being deceived again. I watched him approach new relationships with caution that pained me but understood was necessary. He attended therapy twice a week, working through his trauma with a psychologist who specialized in victims of intimate partner manipulation. Slowly, gradually, I saw glimpses of the confident man he had been before Sienna entered his life. As for me, I found unexpected purpose in the aftermath of my ordeal. I began speaking publicly about elder abuse and financial exploitation, sharing my story at community centers and legal conferences. Other victims reached out to me, elderly people who had been targeted by family members or caregivers, people who had been made to feel crazy or incompetent while being systematically robbed. I helped where I could, connecting them with resources and attorneys, offering the validation of someone who had survived similar betrayal. Helen returned to Seattle but visited monthly, and our relationship deepened in ways it had not been since we were young women navigating early careers and new motherhood together. She told me once that watching me expose Sienna's crimes had reminded her why she had become a psychiatrist in the first place, to help people recognize and escape from manipulative relationships before permanent damage was done. 1 year after the dinner party that changed everything, I hosted another gathering in my garden. The guest list was smaller this time, just family and the closest friends who had supported me through cancer and conspiracy alike. We ate the same dishes my grandmother had taught me to make, and we toasted to survival, to justice, and to the hard-won wisdom that comes from betrayal survived. Marcus gave a speech that evening, thanking me for protecting him even when it meant destroying his illusions about his marriage. He said he finally understood that love without truth was just another form of manipulation, and that my willingness to expose painful reality had been the greatest act of maternal love possible. As I listened to my son speak, I felt Richard's presence as clearly as if he stood beside me, proud of what we had built together and what I had protected alone. The roses bloomed in my garden that spring, red petals bright against green leaves, beautiful and resilient and utterly themselves. Like them, I had survived the poison meant to destroy me and emerged stronger in broken places. Sienna had tried to steal my life, my legacy, and my son's future. Instead, she had given me clarity about what truly mattered and the strength to fight for it without apology or hesitation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen.